Welcome to Redefine the Circle, a podcast where we discuss all things pitching. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development at S2 Breakthrough. In this podcast, we're going to highlight topics that focus on how to maximize your pitchers now. We're going to discuss some of the trends that we've seen at S2 Breakthrough and talk about how we use data to create systems and training approaches that are specific to each pitcher. It's so important for us to continue to share this information and facilitate discussion within the pitching community so we can keep evolving as coaches and ultimately grow pitching into something it's never been before. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for joining the quest to redefine the circle. Hi everyone, welcome back to Redefine the Circle. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development here at S2 Breakthrough. In today's episode, we are Series 4, Episode 4. We're going to walk through yet another roadmap, but this time it's going to be a little bit different. So in the previous episodes within Series 4, I've really started, although different stories and different pitchers, we've started in a similar way, looking at the assessment, talking about sort of their first day at S2 Breakthrough, what we saw from a movement standpoint, how it translated to biomechanics, what we did from sort of patterns all the way up to ball flight, and kind of walked you through those details of how we created a really broad, holistic training roadmap for each of our pitchers. And today I sort of want to hone in on the ball flight data specifically. So this is actually going to be, I'm going to be referencing the same pitcher that I did in our first episode, Series 4, Episode 1, but I really want to sort of zero in on what it looked like to really help her regrow or to develop different spin direction and really to expand upon her pitch profile. So if you remember, just a recap here, what we learned about that pitcher in episode 1 is that after her season, so she came to us in December 2020. She trained, that was her initial assessment. She trained for an entire off season, does not have a high school season. And so she had really a solid 5-6 months to train before hitting the summer season of last year in 2021. And after summer season, then fall, then camp season, she came to us really, really fatigued. What we showed in that episode was that her ball flight data, while she was initially, was very clear that her strength was backspin, particularly on the rise. What she showed in her ball flight data when she came back to us by the end of 2021 is that there was a lot of major breakdowns in her patterns. The arm was really rigid, just really trying to make up for the stability that she wasn't getting from the trunk in her motion. And all of her ball flight data is sort of like, clustered together. So she was looking at nothing significant, everything with downspin, about 3, maybe 4 inches of downspin. And so backspin had gone away. There was no separation between pitches. And so, as I mentioned in that first episode, we took an approach to really understand how do we start with her patterns and then really make sure that she's stabilizing her posture. And then we're training the arm to have some fluidity instead of being so rigid, and then taking approaches to regrow backspin. And so today I just kind of want to zero in on that specific element of like, okay, when it came time to really start to grow her pitches, what did the program look like? And the reason why I want to do this is because now I will say this pitcher, she had time, and typically a little bit more time than what we see. But I sometimes think that when we are approaching pitch types or learning different spin directions, we treat it as if pitchers can like very easily just weave in and out of pitches. And what's important to understand is that, it takes time to make sure that a pitcher fully understands and has control over a particular spin direction and achieving a certain amount of break with that spin direction, especially when it's new. And so for this pitcher, it wasn't new as far as she's never had it before in her life, but she had just regrown it, or just had become something that was sort of back in her arsenal. And so taking our time and making sure that before we were just adding all of the pieces, we had a slow, progressive, methodical way to track that she could establish one spin direction, that it wasn't influenced negatively by adding a different spin direction, and just regrowing that pitch profile back to what we feel now is the best pitch profile she's probably ever had, and just carefully and calculated, in a very careful and calculated way, I should say, and letting the data really lead that process. So I just want to walk through the data that we were getting from that process, what the actual training program looked like, what we decided to really prioritize and focus on, and the tools we really gave her to make sure that when we added something else into her training, that we weren't seeing regression on the things that she had just worked on. So want to go through those details. So as always, in this series, I just think it's really helpful to look at the visuals. So if you're listening only, certainly go back to the YouTube channel to be able to look at these visuals. But let's turn our head to the screen here. And what we can see is that this is her first program that I wrote for her, based off of that initial, I would say, like reassessment last December, where we saw that her pitch profile had really all clustered together. So just program number one, I want you to really focus in on what we were doing for backspin here. So typically when I write training programs, I don't spend so much time worrying about the pitch label as I do just the spin direction. So I'll write rise here just so that this pitcher and I can speak the same language. But really what I mean here is backspin. I just want to really establish the ability to spin the ball up, the ability to spin the ball down, if bullet is appropriate in the situation, that, and then start to label the pitches once we've sort of solidified that spin direction. So we're working on backspin here. And I talked about this in the first episode, and the tools that we used were to really slow the arm action down with weighted balls. You'll see here, 12 ounce, 10 ounce, 9 ounce, 8 ounce. This is not cookie cutter. I do not just give these weights to anyone. These were things that I actually watched in person, how she handled them at S2 Breakthrough with each of those weights. And what I would have her do is I would have her track. So she would turn on Rapsodo and we would look at what things look like on the 12, 10, 9, 8, and then the 7. We'd have more 7 here. These are all at 75%. So we were just really looking at when the arm was segmenting, when things were slowing down, when she could feel her arm action and her hand position in space a little bit more, was she able to achieve backspin a little bit better? After that, or following that strategy, when she then went back to a 7 ounce still at low intensity, was that translating? Were we seeing one strategy work for her and the other was not? And then slowly just starting to see how that was translating to 100% as we look back over here. So if you just drop your eyes down, when she did mix fastball and rise, you'll see that I make it very clear, do not track. And the reason for that is because in this first program, we were only trying to see, as we were taking the approach of course, making sure her strength and conditioning was appropriate, getting her back on track with movement capacity and mobility, really, really focusing in on patterns for her. We wanted to make sure that the goal and the center of her program was just about re-establishing backspin. So not just throwing it in like, okay, today, by the end of the session today, now we're just gonna mix it. It's just too much, too fast. We wanted to take a slow approach and wait until the data told us that it was set, that it started to settle, that it was becoming consistent. Not that she could do it 1 or 2 times, but it was really becoming consistent, and then we could add another piece to it. So that's where we started. So then when the data showed us that she was able to start establishing low intensity was going into high intensity, and I can pull that in here. I'm just gonna swipe across. And I showed these in episode 1, whether or not they were the exact graphs, I don't know, but similar concepts. So you can see over here, we were like mid-February, all and OT other were just the way she was labeling the low intensity backspin pitches. So when she started, she was able to successfully achieve backspin when she was throwing weighted balls, and then when she was throwing 7 ounce, she actually was more successful on weighted balls. That's the all here. And then the rise just didn't translate at 100%, nor would we expect it to yet. And we just followed that story. So I'm not showing every bit of data. These are just medians. A lot of times, obviously when I'm tracking this, I'm tracking every pitch that she threw in addition to the medians. But for the sake of this podcast and keeping the story just a little bit easier to follow, I thought these visuals would suffice. So over here to the right, what we can see then is that little by little, you could see, being able to throw, we honed in on weighted balls a little bit more. And then ultimately we started to watch that rise start to travel back up. So it started slowly then to come into high intensity, into backspin. And so this wasn't just like a linear process. So you can see here the dates are like the 29th and the 20th. The week before then, everything was sort of down, and we just started to slowly watch this change. And then as soon as I started to see training session after training session, a very clear indication that what was happening at low intensity was also then translating at high intensity, then we started to mix that fastball in. And so switching over now to program 2, what you'll see the difference is, again, we're not going to go through the entire program. I just kind of want to highlight the main portion or the main focus of the program. And so looking at this bottom portion here, same tools, overload softballs. We talked about this, how we often use overload plyos and then bring it in for softballs to achieve a certain spin direction. We tracked low intensity, we tracked high intensity, and then we started to track what happens to that rise, what happens to that backspin when now we start throwing a fastball. Does the fastball start to look like a rise ball? Does the fastball just stay on its own and they stay separated? Does the rise ball now start to have top spin? What happens to this story? There's no way to predict that. Are they starting to blend? Are they staying apart? Are they influencing one another? And we really want to start to see that story. So we just teased it apart little by little. So now this time, I'm going to swipe across again. When we started to pull these through, now this is just, again, just a reflection of eventually what the data showed us. It showed us that she was just getting better and better with her ability to accomplish backspin at low intensity, how it was translating at high intensity, full power, that it was the fastball and the rise were able to stay separated from one another. And this is really great. This is just telling me that essentially like she's able to really settle in this ball flight data. There's no doubt about it. The reason why we started with backspin, even though all of her pitches came into topspin in that reassessment in December, is because when she first came to us a year before then, what made her special was backspin. And having lost that, we knew it can be resurrected. We just have to make sure we're starting from the right place. And we also want to make sure that we take our time to really establish it. We don't want to rush it back into the program. We don't want to be throwing a billion things at this pitcher at once. We want to really solidify her strength again, which is that backspin. And so we got to a point after weeks and weeks and weeks, and again, just not only seeing the stability here in this backspin, but just the consistency in it, and then the fastball to just sit there. If you just as a reminder, this was a pitcher that is already throwing mid 60s up to upper 60s. So velo really is not a part of the equation here. We're really just talking about sort of regrowing this pitch development concept, regrowing these pitches and making sure that they're stable before adding anything else. So bouncing back to the program, once we had then switched into, okay, let's establish what's going on. We start really focusing on mixing fastball and rise together. Then program 3, what I wanted to start to do, looking here in this bottom right, is start to remove some of those training tools and some of those implements. We're sitting here at about March, April timeframe. So this pitcher doesn't start a summer season until June, no high school season. She's about midway through the off season. And I really just wanted to test it. Essentially, we wanted to make sure, because she's a high velo pitcher, that's something that's also a part of her story. I know we weren't focused on regrowing that was stable. We wanted to make sure that she wasn't just relying on having to throw so many weighted softballs and constantly training at a low intensity in order to achieve that appropriate spin direction. So I just wanted to challenge that. Okay, we're gonna keep everything the same. We're still going to track low intensity, high intensity for backspin, and then what's going on here when it starts to mix. We want to track all of these. We sort of have codes when you're working on this, call it this. When you throw this, call it this. We just sort of have like our own language so that I knew what pitch, when she labeled it custom 1, custom 2, custom 3, what that meant for her. So it was easy for me to track this story in the back end. But this is how we did it. It was just, okay, what happens? What happens to the rise ball on its own when we take away so many weighted balls? Can it hold? Does it still hold? We mix it with fastball. And we just waited to see that story. For her, the answer was yes, it was able to hold. But that's not always the case. We do see that when we remove certain environments, then all of a sudden the pitch starts to fall apart. And that just shows us that it's not ready, that maybe we need to do a little bit more of what I call cycling. So spend some more time doing about half of it with weighted balls and half not, and just kind of bouncing back and forth to just start to really solidify the ability to translate that work when the environment doesn't have so many constraints, because ultimately we're preparing for the game. And so even though in the bullpen you certainly can throw some weighted balls, it's very important that you're able to really have a sense of feel and understanding of how you're unraveling that backspin when you don't have something like a weighted ball, because obviously in the game it's a standard 7-ounce ball there. Redefine the Circle is brought to you by Rapsodo Softball. Whether it's at the plate or in the circle, Rapsodo delivers all the data needed to enhance your players' development and to give us a platform to become more informed and better coaches. Rapsodo pitching is absolutely critical when it comes to maximizing your pitchers. In addition to measuring velocity, pitchers and coaches get a detailed look at all of the ball metrics that influence break: spin rate, spin direction, gyro degree, spin efficiency. Together, these metrics tell a story about a pitcher's data profile And to grow that profile and ultimately maximize what that pitcher can become, understanding the metrics is a must. Rapsodo not only provides high-level feedback in the moment, but also creates back-end reports so coaches and athletes can visualize and fully understand the entire story and how it's progressing. Rapsodo is such a powerful tool. Instant data, relevant metrics, innovative visuals, and don't forget the in-app slow-mo video that allows pitchers to watch their pitching patterns right alongside the ball flight metrics they yield. Bottom line, Rapsodo is a must-have in the world of player development. See the data, feel the results with Rapsodo's softball technology. And so that's what we move to next. Just kind of moving along here in program 4, I just labeled these just for the sake of this podcast, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Our programs are a month long. And what I did for this pitcher was I just decided based on what I was seeing in the data. Sometimes I made a change about 3 weeks in. I would just say something like, okay, now you can track it when you're mixing it with a fastball. It wasn't a program change. It was just sort of like an adjustment to what we were then tracking and starting to look at. So this just gives sort of a linear idea of what that progression looks like, but in no means is it month 1, month 2, or month 3. So by the time we got to, again, about April, what we decided to do here was then to start building in, what does topspin look like when you have the intent to throw some sink? So sink has never been something that she's really on its own has been like the star of her pitch profile. I think at its max, she's thrown about 4 inches down, but because she is a, a +1 to +3 rise ball pitcher, -4 is a good compliment for that. There's good separation between those pitches. So we just wanted to see if rise is really stable, let's build. Let's see how much separation we can create between your pitches. Is the separation we're currently seeing between fastball and rise all you have? Or can we start to push that a little bit and expand it? And the reality is, this was never laid out ahead of time that this is what we were going to move to, because for all I knew, we were going to spend all of February, March, April, and May just resurrecting backspin and getting it to hold with fastball and high intensity. And if that's what the data was showing us, that it was taking that long, so be it. It's really important for pitchers to just really focus on staying on their own timeline. Just see where you are in the now and keep working through that to figure out how to take one step forward and stop trying to put like an external or artificial timeline on everything, because that means we're typically like rushing through things and we end up having nothing great instead of something great. So because this pitcher did such a great job and was so quickly, able to really just tap into that backspin, hold it, be able to mix it with fastball, and she was able to do that quickly, we started to grow drop ball into the equation. And here's essentially what it looked like. We'd throw drop ball. So up here would be your fastballs. She'd throw her plyos, and then we were coming back in to drop ball, and we really worked on it like repeating. It kind of sat on its own. For this pitcher, I used a 5-ounce, so an underload, just at low intensity, not because we were essentially trying to speed the arm up. We were trying to speed the lower arm up because her neutral had become being able to throw backspin. And so to be able to unravel and get the fingers behind the ball faster, we were trying to train that with underload just by speeding that process up for her a little bit. So we were tracking low intensity drops, high intensity drops, what's going on here, and just repeating that and basically keeping the drop ball like in its own little silo. We were not focusing on like mixing everything yet. It's too many things to tease apart. And not only, it's not that I thought if we put this drop ball in the equation, then the rise ball is going to blow up. It was pretty clear at this point the rise ball was pretty steady, but when something is not working, and when something is not being achieved, it's really important that the roadmap can tell you where it went wrong. So the roadmap is really detailed. It's like laying out all of these constraints. And so I typically try to think about like removing one constraint at a time when I'm building training environments for pitchers. And this roadmap's a really similar concept. It's like add one piece at a time. And so when something is off, you know exactly what just got added. So if, for example, we just went right into mixing fast, mixing rise, mixing drop all together, and the drop ball really wasn't successful or wasn't looking the way we wanted it to, is it because, she's not able to create topspin? Is it because it's mixing? There's too many variables that are new in that program to really tease apart what it was. And so that's why we just sort of take this very slow, add one thing at a time, solidify it, make sure it's good, and then keep moving on. And so I think that's really the base of this discussion today, is to understand that concept. And so when something falls off, you're not guessing how to get it back. You just go right back one step and see if it's stable there. If not, take one more step back. It's just like a really clear roadmap to follow when you're taking a progression or even seeing some regression with training. So bouncing back over here, leaving drop in the silo while simultaneously then still focusing on fast and rise, mixing together, and then just sort of, over time. So you can see like this picture, I had her mix for 6 and then mix another 6 and then mix another 6. Like basically kind of two different concepts. I want to look at fastball and rise ball as we're throwing more and more and more sets of them, knowing that eventually we're building up to being able to do this over the course of a full game, not just when we throw them a handful of times. So still continuing to challenge that rise ball, fastball combo while over on the side, putting drop ball in a little bit of a silo and seeing how that worked out. And then once we started to see, okay, we're starting to see some separation, we're starting to see the drop ball grow a little bit, then we go into program 5. And what we have here is I started to then pull in this concept of mixing fast and drop in its own silo, and then mixing rise fastball in its own silo. So each of them just, again, very similar to what we were doing with rise and fast, but then adding the mix of fastball. And I just, with the drop ball, and just trying to see like what happens to these pitches when these things start to work together and work in combination with one another. Again, you don't always have the luxury to be so methodical with each of these variables, but I did with this pitcher for 2 reasons. She made change so quickly, so her timeline was just, we had a lot of time. One, just because she didn't have a high school season and she has a greater amount of time for off season than most pitchers in the country, which is great. But then she achieved so much so fast. So I was like, let's just take our time through this and just be sure. We don't want to feel like we're getting to May and like, we don't know if on any given day you're going to have your ball flight data. We want to see that it is set and we've tracked it and we've really pushed it and we've taken our time to make sure that it's gotten there. So this is where she was with program 5 and then program 6 here, where we're really just starting to remove everything and mix them. So it's very much like a very, go through fast, then drop, change, rise, just pitches back to back to back to back without so much weaving in and out, and finally being able to, at the end, just mix all of these and see what's going on. Like, is everything stable? For this pitcher, the answer was yes. So I kind of got away from showing that ball flight data. This was the first one that I had showed. The second one where we started to split in rise ball and fastball, where she started to mix those and see separation. Now let's take a look at this graph over here on the left. We can see when we added drop ball, we're seeing that her OT, which is her off-speed drop, was giving her a little bit more, which was great, which shows us that essentially that's a good training tool for her. So we were just taking our time to see its influence on the high intensity drop. Eventually, this is essentially what she got to, where she was about 4 or 5 inches of that drop ball. And then the rise here, being able to hold steady, which was great. We're seeing that separation between her pitches again, developing some tools here. Sliding all the way over, this is really where she was by the end of this time period, which I had just showed you, where she's mixing everything, where fastball just sits as her hardest pitch here with a little less sink, able to sit that drop ball again about 4 or 5 inches at its median, of course, and then rise, still really able to hold steady. So this to me is just such a great job. I know I did not show in this episode, I did in episode 1, but all of her pitches were clustered right around here when we looked at that reassessment in December of 2021. So for her to be just 3 months later looking at a pitch profile like this, and not a random pitch profile, like this was just over 3 months watching it day by day. I mean, every day that she would have data, we would be able to see it, look at that, look at those trends, see what was going on, make small adjustments if we needed to. As soon as something looked steady, add the next piece, communicate that with her. So she was just really, really clear about what we were doing, what her intent was when she was in training. And this is ultimately what her pitch profile really grew to be, which is incredible in such a short amount of time. Now, the next step, I don't have this from a programming standpoint, but the next step of what we really started to do is essentially just take a look at adding some of her east-west pitches back. And a lot of times I think we do this backward, where we give pitchers all the pitch labels early. We especially give them like screw rise, because they appear to be good pitches when we just sort of like angle pitches in one direction or another. But the way we look at it here, again, I don't program just rise drop because I think, and we should only be throwing rise drop. And we're just really focusing on topspin versus backspin. First, basically being able to establish a baseline of vertical separation between pitches. And then once that's established, which obviously throughout the course of this discussion, we've talked a lot about, then putting in the east-west pitches of curve and screw and seeing what family they belong to. Do they sit with bullet spin, and so they're just a bridge between your sink and your rise? Do they tend to sort of side with sink or side with rise? What do they do? And that's important because then it starts to tell us essentially what pitches really mimic one another, what's going to be the approach when we are going in game with these pitches. And so that's kind of where we got to be with this pitcher. So during the time of about most of April, we were just challenging her at high intensity, making sure that velo was where it needed to be, that her pitch profile was holding steady while she was throwing at high intensity. And now in this final month here in May, what we're focused on is really like less of pitch development and more of pitch design. So if we look over here, you'll see we've added screwball. She actually never had a screw, and all it is, she just keeps angles in, rise, keeps it inside, keeps it down in the zone, so it's a screwball, but it is still a +3, and sometimes this pitch has as much as like +5. And so really, really nasty pitch. To be throwing upper 60s hard inside and has that spin is a really tough pitch to hit. And then when she added curveball in here, it added most of the time about an extra inch of horizontal just from the intent of trying to throw curve. So now we have a -3 pitch. Still, not significant sink. It's in the sink category, but it's not necessarily a great vertical pitch for her, but still can use it from a horizontal standpoint. But she can see sort of what family it belongs with. And so to really understand like her approach when she's going to be throwing these tools in games, what pitches mirror others, and what really allows her to create separation between pitches. This sort of brings it full story. She's got a rise ball out of the zone, now in the zone. She still has that separation. Obviously, changeup's not listed here, but the separation between those sink pitches and those up pitches, some with a little bit more horizontal, it just gives her a much more of like a full idea of what she has. And so this final program is just going to be focused, again, less on pitch development because we are pretty confident that that has held steady, and more pitch design of how to sequence things, what pitches are going together, how to really attack hitters with these tools. And then going live. So that I talked about in episode 1, where we're really watching how these tools hold up when she is throwing live to see if there's any discrepancies. Are there just discrepancies in single pitches, in full categories or families of pitches with topspin versus backspin, and just starting to digest that and to really be clear about, like, you may see regression. That it's not just like a linear process all the time, and once it's set, it's set. There are variables that come into play, and that's just the beauty of being able to measure it, being able to track it, that we don't have to freak out if something is a little bit off. We'll just go right back to what we knew got you there in the first place, and let's just incorporate a little bit more of that. And so I just wanted to, again, in this episode, go through like the really clear details of how we are trying to ultimately create a pitch profile that is real for this pitcher, that should be able to really withstand, I should say, all of the demands of the game, of the volume of pitches that she's preparing to throw, that it's not just like we quickly threw all of her pitches in, we mixed a bunch of variables together, and now we're just hoping that she can go out there and translate it. She has a really high level of confidence just in being able to see this story keep going, slowly get put together. And there's room for growth. Of course, there's room for growth here. But again, just looking at where she was when she started a few months ago, it's just a huge, huge improvement. And especially to see that strength in the rise ball, be able to hold steady. And now for her to have screw and rise in the zone, out of the zone with such great break, it's just a totally different ball game. So again, today's roadmap was about pitch development and pitch design specifically. Keep that in mind when you are working with your pitchers, just really understanding like what are the pitches that are a little more difficult for them. So in this circumstance, I knew that creating drop is just a little more challenging for her. There's a reason why her neutral is actually backspin. So we knew that disappeared for a reason. Once we attacked that and knew we could get that back, that came back to her very easily when we took the right approach. Growing topspin is just more of a challenge for her until things start to change about her arm slot and things like that. So knowing that piece about your pitchers, knowing what to start with, knowing really how far to challenge that pitch before just adding something else into it, and just having a plan for making sure that everything you're adding is being added around the star of the show, the true strength for that pitcher, and that it's not a random collection of like pitch labels that we're just trying to throw on the table for her. So hopefully this was helpful just in kind of seeing how we put together a plan specifically for someone's pitch profile. Again, I wanted to just sort of back out of the biomechanics piece and the movement piece, especially as we're approaching season now. It's not always, you don't always have the luxury of like, let's really work on her posture. You're in the middle of June, middle of July, and you're looking at ball flight data. This hopefully just gives you a little bit of an idea of where to start as far as what's the first thing that you should focus on. And remember, I can't emphasize it enough. Don't give it like it has to be in this timeline. It doesn't work like that. You have to just let the data tell you how this pitcher's doing, how she's responding, make sure she's in the know, and then develop from there. Thank you everyone for tuning in this week. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, be sure to check us out. Check this episode out and every episode in Series 4 on YouTube, because I think the visuals are just really critical to be able to really see these full stories and see them come together. Next week, we will be wrapping up Series 4. Looking forward to that discussion. As always, between now and then, continue to quest on to redefine the circle. Thanks, everyone. See you next week. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I'd love to connect and hear your feedback. You can contact me directly at ashley@s2breakthrough.com. If you're listening, you can leave us a review, or if you're watching, go ahead and leave a comment below. Also, be sure to follow S2 Breakthrough on all of our social media channels and subscribe to Stream S2 to find all things player development. Until next time, quest on.